All right, today we're jumping into a really intense debate that's been unfolding in Aotearoa, New Zealand. At its heart, it's a story about how indigenous wealth gets managed, and it pits these very traditional values of openness against modern, often secretive corporate structures. And look, this isn't just some local squabble. It raises a massive question. When a community's heritage and future are on the line, who actually gets to call the shots? This one line right here, it absolutely nails the core issue. We're not just talking about a simple disagreement. We're talking about a system that some people believe allows a very small group to make huge decisions in the dark, decisions that affect assets owned by thousands. And honestly, it's a conflict that's tearing a community apart. Okay, now some pretty provocative language has entered the conversation. Critics have started using this term as a political metaphor to describe what they see as a serious breakdown in power and accountability. But let's be super clear here. This is a critique of the system. It is not a literal accusation of criminal behavior. Think of it as symbolic language for a perceived class of elites who seem to operate above the fray without facing real consequences. So let's really unpack that. Let's dig into this structural problem. It really is a tale of two trusts, a fundamental conflict between two totally different ways of thinking about governance and two completely different philosophies for how you manage these priceless collective assets. The whole debate really centers on these organizations called Post-Settlement Governance Entities, or PSGs for short. Basically, these are corporate bodies that were set up to be the guardians of an incredible amount of wealth. We're talking land, money, resources, all returned to Māori tribes from historic treaty settlements. They're meant to benefit not just people today, but generations to come. And right here on this slide, you can see the divide just laid bare. On one side, you've got the traditional Maori land court model, which is all about visibility, public hearings, open records, everything out in the open. But on the other side, you have the modern corporate model. Now, this was often chosen to compete in today's economy, but it operates behind this wall of commercial confidentiality. And for the people who actually own this wealth, the beneficiaries, this isn't just a technical difference. No, it's the difference between seeing exactly how your assets are being managed and just being told to trust the people in charge. Okay, so that's the theory. But how does this kind of abstract conflict actually play out in the real world? Well, let's go to what we're calling the landfill flashpoint. It's a fight over a piece of land, over the water that runs through it, and really over the future of a whole community in a place called Dome Valley. So the flashpoint, it's a proposal for a massive new landfill, and its location is, to put it mildly, controversial. It's planned for the headwaters of a river that flows directly into the Kaipara, one of the largest and most ecologically fragile harbors on the entire planet. So for a lot of people, this isn't just an environmental risk, it's seen as a direct threat to the Maori, the very life force of the land and the water. At first, the opposition from the community was incredibly unified and strong. A key moment was the placing of a rahu, which is a form of traditional prohibition. And this wasn't just like putting up a protest sign. This was a powerful act of customary law, a declaration that this area was now under protection for both conservation and spiritual reasons. But that united front, which had brought together both Maori and non-Maori in this common cause, it started to crack. A story that began with kotahitanga, or unity, quickly turned into one of division, after some of the main groups who were leading the fight suddenly and very publicly changed their mind. So if you ask the community leaders who are still fighting the landfill, the explanation is simple. They believe their own leadership, working behind closed doors, cut some kind of secret deal. The accusation is that the PSGEs basically traded their opposition for money and jobs, through a private agreement that the rest of the community has never, ever been allowed to see. But, and this is a huge but, the PSG leadership tells a completely different story. A representative for one of the trusts, Joe Pema, he argues this wasn't about personal gain at all. He says the trust had already spent millions of dollars in legal fees fighting the landfill, and after years in court, they were just running out of money to keep the fight going. In his view, it was a pragmatic choice, not a sellout. And this is why that fight in Dome Valley is so important. It's way bigger than just one local dispute. It has essentially put this entire governance system on trial. So let's zoom back out and connect what happened here to those bigger structural problems we talked about at the start. So critics argue that these corporate-style structures are really vulnerable to something called patronage lock-in. Now, that's a term from political science, and it sounds kind of complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's what happens when people's jobs and their voting power get tangled up together. And here's how that loop can work. You have a leadership that controls who gets jobs and contracts. Naturally, the employees, the contractors, and all their families benefit from that arrangement. So when an election comes around, that group has a very, very powerful reason to vote to keep the current leadership right where they are. And that can make the leadership almost immune to criticism from the wider community. It just becomes a self-reinforcing circle. And this effect gets supercharged when voter turnout is low. I mean, check this out. In a recent election for one of these major trusts, the turnout was reportedly just 22%. When that few people vote, a small but really motivated group, like, say, the people who directly benefit from the current system, can have a huge outsized impact on who wins. This all leads to an even bigger question. Is the problem just the corporate structure itself? Or is it more about a lack of education on how to even navigate that structure? Some people are calling this the power literacy gap. The argument is that the owners, the beneficiaries, are never really taught how authority works in these complex systems, or how to hold their leaders accountable. I mean, a system can look democratic on paper, but if most people don't know the rules of the game, power is always going to concentrate at the top. And on top of all that, the fight itself just gets incredibly complex. Look at this. This is an email trying to summarize a 195-page court decision. It's not a clear win or a loss. The court basically said the landfill application wasn't good enough, but then left the door open for the company to come back and fix it. This is the kind of dense, legally complicated world these community groups have to operate in, usually with way fewer resources than their corporate opponents. And so finally, we get to it, the fundamental dilemma. All these different issues, the governance models, the patronage loops, the messy legal battles, they all point back to one core, unanswered question. At a recent community meeting, a youth representative stood up and asked this very question. The meeting minutes note that the silence that followed was, quote, deafening. And wow, what a powerful reminder that beyond all the arguments about corporate structures and legal fees, there is a deep, deep cultural and spiritual responsibility at stake here. And I really want to stress this. This isn't a simple story of good guys versus bad guys. It just isn't. At its absolute core, this whole thing is a debate about institutional design. It's a profound argument about what the best system is for both protecting and growing collective wealth for future generations, while also upholding essential cultural values. And so that leaves us with the ultimate challenge, the tightrope that every single one of these organizations has to walk. How do you possibly balance the commercial freedom you need to build wealth in the modern world with the democratic accountability you owe to the people who collectively own it all? There are no easy answers here, just really, really difficult choices. Thanks for joining us.